You're listening to the AV-IT Amplifier. Each week, we'll feature voices and ideas that need to be amplified in the higher education and pro-AV IT communities. This show is brought to you by higheredav.com. And now here's your host, Ryan Gray.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the AV-IT Amplifier. If it is Wednesday, you know we are here with another episode for you, and we have a very special one today because for the first time, the episode is being recorded with a live audience and a breakout at the ACCTC conference, which stands for Arizona Community Colleges Technical Conference. And for this breakout, we have a very special guest, someone that has been on my list for a little while, and I'm a little afraid of because he knows a little too much to share. But this is a topic that I've wanted to get to for a while, and I'm glad we're able to do it. So, Tom, would you please introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Certainly. My name is Tom Aldridge. I am a project consultant, project manager for NV5. Before putting on that moniker, I worked at Yavapai College for 20 years in the IT department, mostly doing AV integration and everything else that came our way. So,
and many other things. True or false? You were at one point the general manager of the Performing Arts Center.
I was both the GM and then did another stint as the technical director.
Yeah. So other duties as assigned took a wide berth in that thing. Okay. And how is it that we know each other?
Hired you here many years ago. So the department that existed at the time was called PTSS and had a vacancy, which Mr. Ryan Gray applied for and was a successful candidate. And that was 10 years ago, right?
More than that?
More than 10 years ago.
Yeah, 11 and some change.
Yep.
So all of this is kind of your fault, is what we're saying. Okay, I'm glad we know.
Multiple things I heard today, I was like, that's your own, like Nick did that to himself. I know what happened. So, but yeah.
Okay, so one of the thing I wanted to talk about is right now a huge topic with in higher ed and in AV and IT circles is the concept of the in-house integration, or people or schools that are deciding not to work with outside integrators, but to purchase boxes, build, design, program their own systems, and keep those things in-house. And some places are full bore on it, some places are terrified of it, some places think it's impossible. But you built that before it was even called that here at a community college in rural Arizona. So I almost kind of have one question for the whole thing, which is how and why did you do that?
It's interesting that, and when you sent me kind of the invite, said, hey, do you want to do this? I thought I went from that field and left to become that prophet from a foreign land that I'm saying you don't need. That's not true. It's like, it's come full circle, you know, and kind of understanding that and working in a position now as a consultant and a project manager and having a lot of different projects with a lot of different entities and going, there's some places that absolutely don't need it. And there's some places that desperately need it. It just really depends on what the situation is. People on the podcast aren't going to have the benefit of the keynote that we heard this morning, but there was a little bit of relative there where it was essentially talking about the evolution of technology over the last, you know, in the case of the keynote speaker, 50 years, but kind of focused the last 20, I'll give it, last 24 or 25 years. So the way it transpired at Yavapai College was way back in the past, the year 2000. Yavapai County passed a bond initiative. And that bond initiative, if I remember correctly, was for $62 million for Yavapai College to do renovations and new construction. So what happened as a result of that is paradigm shifts. Things change in anticipation of new buildings. What's interesting today is the primary building that was built with that is about to go, is in the process of being demoed for renovation. So it was 23 years ago. That building came online 20 years ago. So the way the internal group to do the integrated technologies came to be was the result of taking the old historic AV department. And AV was in the library, it was underneath media services. And AV was rolled into IT. And then there was another division at Yavapai College at the time that dealt with distance learning. It was again referenced in the keynote this morning, but it was point-to-point microwave based video broadcast across, it was actually across the state of Arizona. U of A did it for telemedicine and NAU did it for what was called TV services, which I worked there before I came here. Yavapai College had point-to-point from the Prescott campus to the Verde campus in Clarkdale. So the powers that be at the time had a decision to make, and they were afforded the opportunity to create some positions. The position I initially came on board with was telecommunications network specialist, which that has everything to do with integrated AV. But what it was basically a position that used to work on the leased T1 lines for the evolution of the microwave to T1s for the distance learning. And that position took over kind of AV and distance learning in the back end. And the decision point with that bond initiative was, does it make sense to bring some of these services in-house, to do some of this design in-house, or just hire a position and let that position manage it through integrators out of Phoenix and things like that. We're in Prescott, Arizona, rural Arizona, about 2 hours north of downtown Phoenix. So the position I took didn't know at the time. It was kind of go decide. Does it make sense to do this internally, or does it make sense to continue to outsource this? At the time, and it might be different now, if the die was cast today instead of back then, the service level agreements and the response time weren't good enough out of Phoenix to come up here and do it. It just wouldn't have worked. If classroom technology outages had happened, we would have needed, it would have been next day at the best. And the cost of that service level agreement would have been high. So kind of took some time and decided to do it internally. At that point in time, Yavapai College had 2 classrooms that had technology installed in it and no conference rooms. That was basically it. And then the Performing Arts Center was there. So that's kind of how it came to be. What I did was just trial and error, hey, is there a way to hang this projector in this room and power it? Sure there is. There's also the right way, and kind of deciding, is this scalable? Do we have standards? Do we have staff in-house? Do we have the relationships with facilities management to get power where it needs to be, to get conduit where it needs to be? Those were the decisions that, fortunately, there was a $62 million in bond funds sitting there, and that created the whole process.
So I like that you said trial and error, because it sounds like there wasn't necessarily a model for you to go find and follow at that time. You kind of had to say, this is the expectation, this is kind of the resources, and I have to invent this new way of doing this work in an environment, like you say, where the resources that a lot of other people depend on were just kind of too far away to depend on.
It was, and I say that what I had to draw on really was my time at NAU and my degree. My degree from NAU is electronic media, audio, video production, and engineering. So I worked in studios, I worked in control rooms, I wired head ends and things like that. So I knew there were ways to do this type of tech, but that was the beginning of the spillover of AV going into classrooms and being integrated. And why would you put cameras in the classrooms? Well, it's this thing that we're going to record what's going on. Years later, that got the moniker lecture capture.
Right.
We were doing it before then. NAU was doing it before then, but it was basically all micro productions. It was a like you just did there was a lead in, a clack 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. A production staff shot it, canned it to VHS back then, archived it, and then would reproduce it like at the library. I had that. I knew that was capable of being done. I'd seen professional installations. I'd seen that sort of thing, and just trying to apply that to what was going on here at the time.
And so one of the challenges you faced was, how do I replicate what is being done as kind of a video production in a room, in a space that's not going to have a staff to do said production?
Absolutely. Yeah, the staff is you, as the presenter, as the instructor, as the not even facilitator. And that wasn't entirely true in the early days of the distance learning system. There were producers. There were technicians who worked in the control room, and they would run the cameras, they would run the mixing boards, and they would do graphics and those sorts of things, but that doesn't scale. It doesn't scale to every classroom. It didn't scale to campuses where that microwave or T1 connectivity wasn't there, and it became just figure out a way to have people do it themselves. A couple of fortunate sort of hey, this just happened to be the way things went at the time, was getting a couple of rooms done by integrators out of Phoenix just to steal from them, just to go, you come up and do this, you come up and build this for us, and had a couple of different versions, and one had a Extron keypad, and one had a Crestron touch panel, and it happened. Can I give a plug for Ira Beyer?
Yeah, of course.
Ira is still down in Phoenix. He's a long-time Crestron certified programmer, and at the time, Ira worked for AVR, which doesn't exist anymore, then, kind of went away, and had a conversation. And I remember you talking about it in one of the other podcasts. Ira kind of went, do you just want to learn how to do this yourself? And I was like, can I? And he's like, sure. Like, and here's a Crestron control system. Here's VT Pro and simple Windows. Now you can have it do whatever. And I was like, this is scalable. Like, I can do this, because if I just create this code once, create this keypad once, and start pushing it out, it can do it again and again. Not necessarily the camera automation, that stuff came later, but that was just basic. Turn this on and change inputs.
So what you had was kind of somebody who opened the door into their business in a way that allowed you to like the saying, right, is good writers borrow from other writers and great writers steal from them outright. So the idea that somebody opened that door to like an end user tech manager to say, let me show you under the hood a little bit. This might not be as hard as we make it out to be.
It was, and I think it was done with intent, because the more you learn, the more you want. So he was like, you can do all your basic classrooms now. Hey, do you want to do an auditorium? Shoot, I have to hire you again, and do those sorts of things. But it was a growth process. And my experience then is similar now, is most vendors and everything are very supportive of you if you'll, hey, I want to go take the trainings that these guys are doing. They're like, yep, you can do it. And now it's kind of the norm. It wasn't back then. When I went to a couple of long dead company now, Tandberg, which was purchased by Cisco, and there's another, few companies, Codian was involved and all that. They made video conferencing codecs, and those video conferencing codecs is what I knew in the distance learning realm. I would go to training for those and be the only end user in the room. It was engineers and it was integrators, and they're kind of going, well, why are you doing this? I said, because we're in rural Arizona and I can't get anybody to help, so I'm going to teach myself how to do it. And it has its pros and cons. You make a lot of mistakes, but it also opens the door for what's possible.
So, I mean, that was my next question, was the idea of, by the time I got here, and I would say things were rocking and rolling, existed for a while, the focus on constant professional development training and being certified in the things that we were doing as end users was it was obviously a huge priority for what was going on. So you mentioned a little sort of, there was willingness for people to let you kind of into that training, but it was odd to be there. Did you find, that there were more obstacles than you expected, or fewer obstacles than you expected of getting that expertise and then building that into other people?
There was fewer obstacles from the people delivering the content, the training, the vendors, whoever it was. The obstacles tended to be more based on budget and approval to travel, and those sorts of things, like not really used to, well, why do we need to send you to do this? We usually pay somebody to do this. It's like, in the long run, it's going to cost less for us to know how to do it internally. And same sort of thing, when Yavapai College first started going down those paths, the training was available maybe in Atlanta, maybe in Rockledge, New Jersey, maybe in a couple of other places, and you'd have to travel there. A lot of their curriculum wasn't handily available online at the time, and you had to go in person. And now it is, and you can self-teach, or bigger entities, as having a discussion earlier today, bigger universities and stuff will host the training themselves, because there's enough people internal to do it that the company will come and put on that session. And that really wasn't the case 20 years ago. You had to go find it.
So what's the first space that you said that was Yavapai College, designed, procured, programmed, and ground up?
It's now 2216, unless I'm mistaken, over in the top of building 2. Room 216, hence the name, it was a space that had some tech in it that was best effort done by the instructor. It was an instructor who took it upon themselves to try to put some advanced tech in it. And it was the first room on campus that had a ceiling mounted projector, not an overhead projector, a digital projector, at a 800 by 600 resolution. And it had 4 27-inch CRT monitors hung around the perimeter of the room. And then that instructor didn't teach in that room anymore. And it was, nobody knows how to use this, nobody knows what this is. So that was kind of the first task, was to take this room apart and build it back into a room that anybody can use. And then the next step after that was eliminating the control rooms in the distance learning environments. Not necessarily eliminating the technician tweaking them so that they could be scalable.
Yeah.
And it was making things like camera control automated with presets, making things like writing mic levels become automatic mic mixers and things like that. But yeah, 2216.
And it is. So I always thought that 2216 was named after Dr. Benjamin Tutu from the
2216. Yes.
No, is that not right? That was the worst joke, and it got no. There are other people in the room, and no one cared. No one. Even the people who work for me didn't care about that one. All right, sorry about that.
Don't encourage it.
Don't encourage that. No, yeah, that room does still exist. Yep. So okay. So from there, you use the word scalable a couple of times. Mm-hmm. So both in those days and today, what do you when you say scalable? Most people just think, oh, I can take one and make it 100. What were the strategies you were using to say this is I don't need to be able to just do 2216. I'm going to need to be able to do this for eventually something in every single space that we have.
And the every single space is kind of the defining factor there. If it were 100 classrooms that were exactly the same, you can mass produce that. Now you can do it with the same code, you can do it with everything like that. And Yavapai College then had some of that. Even now, it still really doesn't. There's not 100 of the same spaces.
Right.
There's 100 different spaces. Mm-hmm. And the scalable aspect was try to whatever extent we can to make the experience the same no matter the space. Apply the same standards, apply the same thought process in all of these. And prepping for this, I was trying to think of, what were some of the most challenging spaces? And, the district governing board council chambers, that was done wrong 3 times until it got done right. And I really think it was pretty much done right the last go round. In hindsight, you could always done things different or better, but it's like, okay, this actually finally does meet the needs. But it was based on standards. It's kind of like I should be able to do this in this room. Classrooms and labs, lots of those. Medical simulation wasn't as quite a standardized process as it is now. Yavapai College has a teaching preschool. There's not a manual on how to design AV systems for a teaching preschool, at least not that I'm aware of. Greenhouses, like, hey, let's go put distance learning technology into greenhouses. It didn't really work, but it was an attempt. But underlying all those was that scalability. Like, all right, if this is going to have cameras, microphones, and speakers and amplifiers, they don't necessarily need to be any different. They might have to physically be different if the environment's different, but the approach doesn't need to be any different. Meeting room, ambulance bay, those sorts of things are, if I can walk up to this interface and know how to use it, that's the scalability was. I don't need to retrain everyone again and again and again on every space, kind of get the broad outline, and you should understand how to do it.
So then, speaking of being scalable, you start with you and eventually have to kind of go through building out a department, what became a department of people, serving as a true, not only, in-house integration and support thing. What was that experience like in saying, okay, I think I've got a concept for how this could work, but now scalability and longevity means building that into other people?
Yeah, it was easy. Every position I created had a long line of applicants with CTS and the correct.
Yeah,
it was
right.
It was a challenge. It wasn't a bad challenge. It was a fun challenge. It was can you find the people with the right background to learn how to do these things? You absolutely can. It was a matter of student workers were a great place to mine from to go. What are you doing right now? Well, I'm in CNT. Computer networking technology, or I'm in, I'm learning to write code, or I'm doing those sorts of things. Did you ever think about a career in AV? Of course I didn't, but it's like, well, no, this is actually strongly related, especially, and this will come up probably several times. What was going on in the industry right then was called the grand time of AV IT conversions. It was, Yavapai College was probably early on in taking AV underneath the umbrella of IT, and now there's almost no difference. And you have to that. Back then it was like, all right, if I can learn how to do this, I can probably find people who I can teach and build up. Every once in a while, yourself included, there would be outside applicants who had some of the skill set already, mined from people who worked with me at NAU to get an engineer who was here for a long time that is retired to come down here and work to go, I know you know how to do engineering work, high level work, will you come down here and work with me? But then also, just stumbling upon Infocom at the time of ACCTO and going, there's a organization that does this and will teach us how to do these things. I was very familiar with NAB and the broadcasting background, so Infocom wasn't too far of a leap. And then realizing, oh, hey, there's a, CTS and the exam is way different, than it used to be. But then the specialization in CTSI, CTSD, and those sorts of things, it's like, oh, hey, we just happen to, kind of go down the right path as the industry was doing very similar things.
So you said, stumbling upon Avixa and going, oh, look, there's actually, I'm not the only one on this island. There's other people doing a similar thing. I know that, from the beginning, this goes back a long time, but you had CTS certification as a prerequisite for pretty much every job in that department. What was what would drive you, what was the value you were seeing out of that? And how, as you said, we're in rural Arizona, there's not necessarily a line of CTS certified people coming through the door. So how did you deal with that?
It was CTS by itself, just the name is so vague. What it stands for is, Certified Technology Specialist. What does that mean? Yep. And it's a great thing because it is kind of across the board. It is broad. It was twofold. It was, the technical aptitude that comes with being able to study for and pass the CTS exam. And it's also understanding what an end user needs when they're using the technology that you're designing. And that's the, that was kind of the crux of it, and realizing, well, hey, if most people in the organization or in the department can have the CTS certification, it means they're capable of learning. And a lot of people will say that's true of a certificate from a place like Yavapai College or a degree. It just shows an aptitude for being able to be taught, retain the information, and be able to apply it. And CTS is a great example of that being able to exist. Why do I need to do this? And then after you've done it, you're like, oh, hey, that was great. Now I understand this. You don't necessarily, you're probably not going to be required to calculate the impedance of an entire, don't even do it that way anymore. But serial parallel, sort of in-series parallel sort of setup for speaker deployment. But it would let you know that exists, and if you ever have to support it, it might be there. And that was very beneficial. And the college was very supportive of that track.
Yeah. So, and what effect did you see in terms of having, yourself and other staff be CTS certified when trying to deal with other parts of the industry, deal with manufacturers, and try and occupy not just the end user space, but occupy the integrator space from an end user point of view?
It was the advantage of realizing you weren't existing in a silo, I think was a lot of the attraction to it, to go, you can be a professional integrator working here. And in fact, that kind of became the credo. You're going to work here, you're going to have the CTS, we're going to do things in the, as professional as possible. Sometimes you have to do things that are, quick on the fly. You have to kind of make things work. But if you get to lay out a budget and you get to lay out an equipment replacement plan and you get to cycle these things every time, it should be better. It should be more refined. And getting to that point, it just lent itself to it to go, open your world to the possibility that pulling this cable through the wall, it's great that you thought to do that. You're not the first person who thought to do that, and there are other people out there that have thought to do it that are in the same boat. And then back then, and still now, but going to those trainings, going to those early restaurant trainings, those early Tamberg trainings, and being in a room of people doing it, and you'll see those people again and again, and it's a very small community once you're in it for a while, and higher ed especially, and seeing people that go back and forth between different vendors or different integrators, but knowing that person's, that person worked on a really big project for this really big school. It'd be cool to find out from them what they think of this.
So now, fast forwarding many years, and there's, now we have a term for this, and there's training on it, and being in, and people actually now offended. I'm not an end user. I'm an in-house integrator, not naming any names, but you know who you are that gets offended with that every time. What would be your, and especially it's kind of interesting having now, moved from being in a higher ed environment to working at NV5, what would be your advice, thoughts, call to action or call to disaction if there's a school out there considering that kind of move, or thinking, it might work better for us if we had this expertise in-house instead of being dependent upon it outside.
One of the thoughts that popped into my head along that line, thinking about this today, was having an internal integration team never means you can't, won't, or shouldn't utilize outside resources. Yeah, that's never what it means. Consultants, which I wear that badge now, have a time and place, and they should absolutely be used, like when you need to. Design, build, integration firms absolutely have a place and should be used. Knowing how to pick your battles, is kind of the thing. Knowing when you're in over your head, and being able to admit that, and know when you're right. When like, hey, no, we can do this in-house. A couple of projects here that some went well, some did not, but dealing with a professional touring performing arts center and knowing we're in over our head, we need to bring in outside experts, and then being so frustrated when you know more than the outside experts that come in was a learning experience, and kind of going that. From an NV5 standpoint, it's a different realm. We live in the world of a lot of the time what are called deliverables, which means you're either the end user is paying us for a product, or a lot of the time we're part of a design team with an architectural firm, and architects have a product. Pretty much everybody knows what those are. They're the plans to build the building, and we have a deliverable from an NV5 standpoint within that set of plans. They're T sheets for technology, their S sheets for security, or their lighting sheets, their Y sheets for certain other things. And it's like, well, who sees that? And that was the thing that was really important to me, was to go, wait, there should actually be a section in these plans for the building of this construction that has to do with technology. Yeah. And I should be able to see on those plans where the data drops are, where the projectors are, where the back boxes are, what the the J hooks above grid, the cable tray above grid, where all that's supposed to be, and it should be clearly in there. It exists a lot of times. A lot of times it might be part of an electrical package, or it might be part of a low voltage package that might be design build after the fact. And realizing that, I'm like, oh, hey, those are the things that at YC, I always wish I had to go back and look at, or to go, hey, this section of this building is about to be renovated. Do we have as-builts? And do we have as-builts that actually show what's in there? And can you go back and look at numbers on sheets to go, well, how many data drops did that building have? It had, 162. Is there any information we could go back in to say why it had 162? No, it just did, because that's what we thought it needed to have. And now being able to go through that and go, hey, this would be very valuable to colleges, universities, any end user who's trying to budget this, who's trying to go, what's the ERP cycle on this going to be? And that's huge. I do think in-house people can do that, absolutely. It takes a lot of time. Yeah. And one of the things I wrote as we're at this point in the conversation to break out the word precipice, just because I wanted to say it.
That's a good word.
We're at the precipice of AI and VR environments and all that, and modeling and 3D modeling, and NV5 offers scan to BIM services and stuff like that. And BIM is building information management, and it's the drawings, but it's not drawings in a 2D realm. It's in a 3D realm, and that's been around for a while. There's an application called Revit that NV5 uses, lots of people use, and you can model and build things and see it real time. To advance beyond that is that concept of like digital twin, like, well, we're going to build the building completely in the digital realm first and see what works, and then you can go in and place projectors. You can go put conduit in the walls. You can do all these things, and then you can look at it and go, that's dumb. I'm going to scrap that, and you're not in the real world yet. One thing that is very interesting, and this may change, it's interesting right now across the board. It would be interesting to do a survey amongst contractors and things like that about this. But even though these buildings are built in the 3D realm, they're built or designed in the 3D realm, they're built in the 2D realm. Yeah. Skilled trades folks that are in the field, framers, electricians, build off of 2D paper in front of them. It's still printed out to scale. It's still in a dusty corner of a construction site with this, and those individuals are building it off of 2D. So it has to translate down into something that can be constructed. I think architects would like to go, oh, hey, we'll have 3D renderings and VR headsets, and I'm like, I don't know if I want my framer framing with the VR headset on. So that might not be what you want them to do, you know. So.
Not until Yavapai College develops a program to train people to do that. That's a great idea.
There you go.
Nice. All right. Well, half hour goes fast. I have one more question before we come to the end, which is, given the time frame in which you developed this department here at Yavapai College, is it fair to refer to you as the godfather of in-house integration?
I think it's fine. You know, I think there's other people that are going to lay claim to it, you know, because it was happening.
Are we willing to fist fight those people for the title? Because I've got your back on that.
That should be a session at Infocom, you know, like, do you claim this title? Let's go see who did it first.
We could have like a debate over that sort of thing. Okay, well, again, a half hour goes really fast.
Yep.
Tom, thank you for joining us. If people wanted to get a hold of you and learn more about anything that you've talked about, or ping NV5, how would they do that? tom.aldridge@nv5.com, or find me on LinkedIn. I spend time on LinkedIn and will respond to people, and will post some stuff from time to time. I'm not a big poster. I'm a big consumer, not a big poster. Lurker.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
well, that's
I
good.
lurk in there. But yep, LinkedIn or email is great. Or if it's early June right now. If you happen to be in Las Vegas at a trade show next week, that might be a good time to meet up, you know, and find some stuff out. So.
Sounds good. Well, Tom, thank you for being with us today.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the AV IT Amplifier. Tune in next week for more with today's guest. It'll be great, or your money back. Your host has been Ryan Gray. He's on the tweeters at Ryan_A_Gray, or find him on LinkedIn to connect. Please subscribe and give the show a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by higheredav.com. The views expressed here are not necessarily those of our respective institutions, employers, or sponsors. Everyone hang in there, go easy, and we'll be back next week.